Okay, here at the start of the semester, I do like to go over just some expectations and study tips. This is a 3000 level course, and so students at this time are expected to be resourceful and to conduct themselves professionally. If you have a question, certainly I'd like to help you work your way through those questions. That's a part of the learning process. But I also expect you to be resourceful. If you have a question, don't just save it for, hey, I'll let Chris answer it. Look it up in the textbook. Work on finding web resources that are reliable and try and identify what's different between those that are reliable and unreliable. That's going to be an important skill for you to have later on. You should prioritize your studies. We're going to cover a lot of information this semester, and if you try and study everything equally well, you're going to find that you're going to run out of time. From each lecture, I'd normally recommend students make a top 5 to 10 list of things that I'm likely to ask on an exam, and start their studies with those things. And if they have more time, then they can delve a little more deeply. For each lecture video that you watch, since they're a little bit shorter in length, I'd recommend figuring out 1 or 2 questions from each video that could be that you can focus on for your studies. You should attend our meetings, our virtual meetings. I'll help you work through some problems. That's a great time to ask questions. But when you do ask questions, I'm going to ask what you think too. I do answer questions also via email, but please note that my expectation was that if you send me a question via email, you tell me what you think first, and I can tell you if you're on the right track. Show me you've done some work first. I expect that you take notes from videos. Students who take notes do more than a full letter grade better than students who do not take notes. Students who take notes with pen and paper do about a half letter grade better than students who take notes on a computer. It turns out that students who try and focus on taking notes from on a laptop or computer are trying to capture words verbatim. So the focus is not on trying to understand what's being covered, but on capturing words, which can later be studied. That's not as effective. When you take notes with pen and paper, because you can't write everything down, you're trying to capture ideas, and so you're processing information along the way. And so one, you're more aware of what your questions are as you learn, and you're starting to make connections between variables. So really important that you take notes as you watch these lecture videos. You should avoid distractions as much as possible. Educational research has demonstrated that students who simply check their phones in class, not who are on their phones, but who simply check their phones in class, do about a full letter grade worse than students who do not. You should skim ahead. One way to make sure that you're able to connect variables is to know some of the terminology that we're going to be using. It's very helpful then to know where a discussion or lecture is going before you get there. If you skim a little bit ahead in the textbook before we get to a topic, then when we cover a topic, it's going to make a lot more sense to you. Read the text. Now, when you're reading, you should take recall breaks. The way that we move things from short-term to long-term memory is through recall, and this process we call consolidation. So what you do here is you read a couple pages, maybe you write down a couple of key words, maybe a partially blank figure that's important or something like that. You set the book aside and you say, what did I just cover regarding these topics? That is making sure that you are moving things from short-term to long-term memory. If you sit down and simply read a chapter from beginning to end, you are not going to retain information as well. Skimming has a role here too. When you skim before you read, it allows you to connect concepts not only to what you've covered before, but what's coming up. So you have a better big picture and understanding. You should also prepare, answer and write some of your own test questions and try and answer those after every lecture or every video. That can be a part of your prioritizing your studies. A lot of students like to rewrite their notes, and for some students that works well. But if you were to rephrase your notes as questions, that is going to be more specific to the way that you're going to be tested. And I think you'd find that very helpful. As much as possible, I would encourage you also to draw pictures. Very critical, particularly in the summer class, to not get behind. We're going to be covering 2 hours of lecture, 2/3 of a week, every day, compared to the regular academic year. And so we're covering information a lot faster. We're taking a 15-week, if you include finals week, 15-week semester, and putting it into 5 weeks so students will be able to take subsequent classes afterwards. So it's going to be very accelerated. If you were to skip a day of watching videos, that means the next day you may have to watch 4 hours of videos to catch up. It's just not possible. So do not get behind. This is again studied talking about how taking notes with a pen and paper is much better than using a laptop. And don't be on your phone when you're taking notes or in class. The textbook is an outstanding resource. Again, when reading, you first preview, skim what you read, then you read and you recall. So when you're reading, you preview what you're going to cover, then you read it, and then you recall. It makes your reading time much more effective, especially if you're one of those students who can read a couple of pages and then stop and go, what did I just read? This process will keep you on track better, and you'll retain information much better. Now, in human physiology, when we're talking about ways to explain body functions, there are two general kind of ways we can do that. We can do that through either a teleological or a mechanistic explanation. A teleological explanation is one that's more, why is this process beneficial? And a mechanistic is what's causing it, this change. Quite often, if I ask you, why does something happen in the body, I'm usually asking you for this mechanistic explanation. So, for example, if I were to ask students, why does heart rate go up during exercise? A lot of students would naturally focus on the teleological explanation. We need to increase heart rate so we can deliver more oxygen-rich blood to the exercising muscles. But that says nothing about what's causing that change, okay? Now, the teleological explanation may relate to our evolutionary history. We have these mechanistic processes that help to regulate heart rate, in part because they were beneficial for us and allowed us to evolve and adapt. So, the mechanistic explanation would be that we have receptors in the muscle that send information to our brainstem, and we have receptors that relate to regulation of blood pressure, which sends information to the brainstem, and we have motor areas of the brain that send information to the brainstem. And when our muscles get active, these signals that go to the brainstem are going to result in a change in parasympathetic and sympathetic tone to the pacemaker of the heart, the sinoatrial node, and cause an increase in heart rate. We're going to cover that in a lot greater detail in our cardiac chapter, but that explains what information is being processed, what are the regulatory centers, and how is the neural output or signaling output to the effector organ taking place. So a mechanistic explanation is talking about what is causing